This is JC Zumbo of the Wolfpack Central, which is part of Rivals.com network. We are talking to Conor O'Neill from Deacons Illustrated, who covers Wake Forest, also for the Rivals.com network, and the perfect person to break down the Deacons this week because they are playing at NC State, 12 o'clock Saturday, CW network. I think State had about 420,000 or so viewers for their game against Northern Illinois. So maybe a little bit more for when they play Wake Forest on the CW. But State's 3-2. Wake Forest, not 3-2 right now. Struggling a little bit at what, 1-3 right now.
Yeah,
And
they'd like to be 3-2
yeah,
or
so
even
Wake's
two and
got some
two.
work to do to get bowl eligible. But for people who want to see some of the stuff on the Wolfpack Central, um, NC State Rivals on Twitter, the Wolfpack Central on Instagram, which is rapidly growing. Um, Almost any good football and basketball recruit in the state of North Carolina can be found on YouTube at JC Zumble, and then at NC State Rivals on YouTube for post-game interviews, Dave Doran press conferences, player interviews, all that good stuff. But for this week, though, it's been about the Deeks, been a little bit about hurricane relief with Hurricane Helene. Davin Van of NC State has been helping raise awareness and getting things to the people out west. Just absolute devastation out there. Um, so that's kind of been like the backdrop. So in a way, sports has kind of been put in perspective. But Wake Forest was trying to tie the game against Louisiana, or for the old timers, Louisiana Lafayette, and kid from Myers Park, who has been a pretty good kicker, doinked it off the left upright. Louisiana wins 41-38, and that's the backdrop going into this week. What did you kind of take away from that game?
Took away that Louisiana was really efficient offensively. I think they had 9 complete drives and 7 of them ended with points. Um, I took away that Wake's problems are litmus, numerous. They're problematic problems. It's one thing to bust coverages and give up points to Louisiana, to Ole Miss. It's one thing to do it even against Virginia because you and I both think decently of Anthony Calandria and some of the weapons they have on that offense.
He has
You-
Moxie.
You're talking about a Sun Belt team that lost 41-33 to Tulane. Not to denigrate the Sun Belt in any way, shape, or form, but an ACC team playing a home game against a Sun Belt team should not be losing. And not that Wake had anything to do with the previous week, but it now happened 2 weeks in a row in this state. So it's a bad loss. There's no other way around it. You can talk about if you're Dave Clawson, you can talk about the lack of resources when you lose to a team like Ole Miss that has a payroll around $20 million. This is a rough look to complain about player acquisition and the lack of talent you have at certain positions when you get beat by a team that is a G5. So it's not really going too swimmingly here early in the season for Wake.
Obviously I've been following Wake Forest off and on since 2007. Seen good teams, seen some so-so teams. You know, when Wake played State last year and was rotating a bunch of quarterbacks in and out because none of them were good. I think the rushing yardage was pathetic. Whatever the final tally was, the game was never close. I just I had a bad feeling about what was happening for Wake's future. So that's the backdrop for last year. Now, one of the things I wrote about for scouting Wake Forest, we're going to go glass half full. I actually like the quarterback. I like the offense. It's completely different than what I last saw of Wake last year when I was watching the Louisiana game. Hank Bachmeier, who is well traveled, Boise State, then Louisiana Tech, and now Wake Forest, 6 year college, has great relatives, younger siblings. Tiger, who plays at Stanford, Bear, who Tiger's a receiver. Bear Bachmeier is a quarterback commit, highly thought of apparently, who's also going to Stanford. But he has revitalized the offense. How much different can you tell? Just how 9 day is it, I guess, with Bachmeier compared to, say, the Mitch Griffiths era?
Yeah, it's you hit the nail on the head. It's night and day. Wake's offense is back to being functional, and it feels weird to make that big of a deal of it because they really had just the one year that was a blip on the radar. Um, I mean, they weren't. It's not like they were great for Clausen's first 3 years, the 2014 to 2016, but John Walford hit that senior year in 2017, and it felt like that was the season that you started thinking, oh my God, if Wake can hold teams under 30 points, they're going to win 80 to 90% of their games because their offense is just so electric. They have so many possessions. Like that was always the thing. They ran such quick tempo that you could count on them having the ball 12 to 15 times a game and just wearing people out. Um, Obviously that wasn't the case last year. It was far more of a systematic breakdown than it was the fault of Mitch Griffiths. He became the scapegoat because of the position he played, because of his numbers, because of the analytics. I get why that happened. He also had an offensive line playing in front of him that had so many guys that were playing for the first time in their careers, at least in significant snap territory. And so all of those guys are better this year because they're not like they already had the first time in their careers that they're playing significant snaps. And Donovan Green was out all of last year. He's back. We won't really know the extent of what he's back for this game. He's still dealing with injuries because that's basically become the theme of his college career, unfortunately.
Huge
Um,
game against Virginia, though.
He had a great game against Virginia. He left the Ole Miss game at halftime with a hamstring, and you figured he was going to be back to full strength with an off week between Ole Miss and Louisiana, and he still, I think, was about 20 snaps against the Raging Cajuns there, maybe one catch or two catches, very little impact. So I think Clausen called him questionable for this game. So we'll have to see what he looks like in pregame warmups. Um, I mean, Damon Claiborne at running back, guy that dislocated his kneecap last week and came back less than an hour later of elapsed time and runs for a 60-yard touchdown. So he
He looked
he has
so
this
much more explosive than when I last saw him a year ago.
yeah, he has this injury and it's like, oh well, he might be out for the year. I mean, they might be really hurting offensively because he is, I think, the most explosive player they have on offense. I think he's the most explosive player they've had since at least at running back since they had Kenneth Walker the third.
Hmm.
Um, so he's probable. Like he's a gamer, he's a baller. He's apparently just gonna strap a brace on there and ice it up and be ready to go. So the offense is again, to bring it back, it's functional. It moves the ball, it can chew up some yards. It's not like Hank Bachmeier is not going to be mistaken for 21 and 22 Sam Hartman. Like that's not there.
Does he have the
2017
hair,
John
though?
Wolford.
Does
What?
he have the hair?
He's got a nice head of lettuce.
Okay.
I've got to say that might be the most comparable trait that he has with Sam.
And for people who don't know, Sam Hartman is actually done with college football. Completely, totally done with college football. However, Wake Forest does have ageless Taylor Marine at wide receiver, who's been around college football so long. I don't know if his is it his twin sister or his regular sister. I don't know if she's still a cheerleader at NC State because she may not have had that extra COVID year. But it's always interesting when after the game you always kind of see the two of them get pictures together whenever Wake and NC State play. But he's a very good slot receiver. Took a big hit, a really big hit along the sideline toward the end of that Louisiana game. So it'll be interesting to see how healthy he is. But they will play four receivers. They're spreading it out. As you mentioned, Claiborne and the younger Carney are pretty much rotating at running back. Didn't see a lot of use of throwing the ball to the tight end, but maybe that will come at some point. And then I thought it was a very big, large offensive line.
Yeah, their offensive line is better. Devontae Gordon is the left tackle, and he's a fourth year starter. Luke Pettibone has some good NFL pedigree to him. I never remember the exact lineage, but one of his relatives was the Redskins defensive coordinator for Joe Gibbs when they were winning Super Bowls.
Yep, yeah, I can believe that.
Um, yeah. Um, they brought in a right tackle from Indiana State, Keegan Trost, who's been decent up front. I think they got the one salvageable part. I think Indiana State was like 1-10 or 1-11 last year. Uh, they're they're good. Offensively. That's kind of the qualifier here. Taylor Morin, he didn't come up with Clausen when Clausen was running through the injured guys. There were more guys on the defense that we can talk about. I think he'll be ready to go, but behind him, the slot receiver behind him, Deuce Alexander, I think is a budding star. He's a second year guy that's already taking, you know, 35 to 40% of the snaps in the slot. And I kind of liken him to he's got a little bit of Jaquari Roberson, who was a great slot
Sure,
receiver at Wake for 2 years, and he's got a little bit of Greg Dortch to him, who
sure.
there was a year between when Greg had his 2 years and Jaquari had his 2 years of really thriving in the offense. Deuce has some of the elusiveness of a Greg Dortch, like he can make people miss in a phone booth. He also has more size. Like Greg was undersized. Deuce is a little taller, and Jaquari is kind of the one slot receiver that Wake has had in this really good time of having successful offenses. Jaquari was kind of the outlier. He was like 6 foot, 6'1". Deuce is a little more lanky, so he's a good one coming on if Taylor is limited or is unable to play in this game.
Now we're gonna go glass half empty.
Oh yeah,
I like the D line. I think they have some good individual players. I don't know what to make of the linebackers in the secondary. I think it really, one thing though, I think it does start with the quarterback, at least for Louisiana, got so comfortable. There was never really a disruption during his game. I think he went 20 of 29, had just a very efficient effort. Another guy, 6 years of college football, I believe, played at
yeah,
Fresno State, older guy, but he took advantage. They had two good running backs who are legit ACC backs. They could be, playing in the ACC somewhere. So it wasn't like they were, didn't have talent. They had talent, but almost too easy for the Louisiana offense. And looking at, I didn't get to watch the other three games, but I looked at the numbers. Obviously, Ole Miss did whatever they wanted, throwing the ball, passing the ball. Defense did a good job shutting down the run against Virginia. But Calandra, other than a couple picks, he had good numbers. What what could we say about this Wake Forest defense? I mean, do you see some individual talent outside of the D line? I mean, is this just how it is for the rest of the season, or
yeah. There's definitely individual talent in the back seven. The one missing piece against Louisiana that I'm sure they would have liked to have was Branson Combs. He's a linebacker who transferred in from Southern Illinois. He looked awful against A&T in the opener, and it was kind of
okay?
like, oh my God, why has this guy been getting ink from the coaches as like a possible NFL pick or, one of your best incoming transfers, if not the best. And then against Virginia, he was fantastic. And against Ole Miss, even, he was good.
Yeah.
Uh,
So I gather he got injured, or
One of those things where I'm sure you've come across it too, where a team goes into an off week and shuts everything down and you don't get any information. And then, they put out a depth chart that has him starting. So you don't think he's going to be unavailable. And all of a sudden they get out there and you're laying eyes on them for the first time in 2 weeks. And it's like, oh, they don't have this guy who started the first 3 games. Oh, he's down there and he's not even dressed out for the game. So
yeah,
Dave Clawson told us in his Tuesday presser that they're hopeful that he's back. They need him back. Uh, Devon Patterson, the sophomore nickel, is a
Mhm.
very promising player. I think ideally they would want him playing safety, but they have two experienced guys playing safety right now, and they can get him on the field at nickel. They're going to do that, and he can support in the box. Um, they're hamstrung at corner right now. I mean, it's kind of it's a blunt and
I
it's
thought
very
Capone
much
Blue was, I don't know exactly what position. I thought Capone Blue was a corner, but he looked a little feisty out there.
he's a corner. He's also doubtful to play this week. He got shaken up against Louisiana, and he's a
Feisty then.
he he's a sixth year guy who has some tread on his tires, and that's kind of one of the like everybody wants to complain about how old some players are, and other people want to talk about how beneficial it is to have older college football players. Well, sometimes that's a detriment. Sometimes these guys have so much tread on their tires that you realize like every football player kind of has an expiration date on them. And I mean, I'm not saying that's the case here. I'm just saying in general. So he's banged up. It's kind of the same thing with Donovan Green. Like they're both 6 year guys who have not been healthy in their careers, and so you're kind of going into dangerous waters when you're relying on them for being big time producers on your football team. And the backup behind Capone Blue is Jackson Mull, who is also an incoming transfer, and he was at Purdue for the last 2 years, but he was a walk on at Purdue. It's not like they snatched him off of Purdue's roster and he would have been a potential Big Ten starter this year or a rotation guy. He was a walk on. So he's the one who was in coverage when they blew a 75-yard touchdown against Ole Miss. Guy was running down the field 20 yards free of any receiver. It's probably the easiest touchdown Jackson Dart will throw all year.
Sure.
Um, Jamari Glasker is a third year guy who is becoming a decent ACC corner. I don't know that he's there yet, but he's at least progressing, and you can kind of see the confidence building. You can see that, he's getting tested every week. Everybody's going to throw against Wake. I don't know. That's kind of the balance of this game is going to be interesting to see how much State trusts a freshman quarterback to throw against a secondary that has been gouged by some people. So we'll have to measure that. But Jamari Glasker had the interception against Virginia. He's got a couple other PBUs that have been impressive. Like he's a developing piece. I think for Wake they can't have that development happen fast enough.
We kind of started with the doink off the upright with the kicker, but Matthew Dennis is, I think, something like 32 of 43 or 33 of 44, whatever it is, from field goals in his career. So he's made enough kicks in his life where I'm sure he'll bounce back from this. But in general, how have the special teams been?
Their punter's been decent. Ivan Mora, gosh, I can't keep track of the years sometimes with these specialists. He's either a fifth or sixth year guy, and I know he's into the last year of eligibility, but
Phil still lists him as a junior, if that makes you feel better.
oh my God, really?
Yeah.
Wow. Need to recheck that one then. Um, he's been good. Taylor Morin had his first career punt return for a touchdown. He'd been a punt returner for a long time, and he finally broke one against A&T in the opener. They it'll be interesting to see who's back there for kickoffs because they love to have Damon Claiborne back there. He ran one back against Virginia Tech last year, but I'm curious if they'll try to save his leg. And I think Colin Smith, to shout out Eastern Guilford here just a second, I think he's pretty consistent in kicking the ball through the back of the end zone anyway. So they might not get a chance to have a kick return this year. Matthew Dennis is interesting. He stepped into maybe the most unenviable position a kicker could step into because Nick Skiba ended his career as the most accurate kicker in NCAA history. And Matt Dennis had a great season stepping in for him in 2022. Field goals were not an issue. I think he went something like 14 of 16 that year, or maybe 16 of 18, one of those where he wasn't kicking 2 and 3 field goals every game, but when he was asked to kick a field goal, he was reliable. And really in the second half of last year was the first time that you really thought like, man, they don't have as much confidence as they had in him for the first year and a half that he had that job. And where they really opened themselves up to criticism is they didn't bring in a kicker to compete with him. He competed, but it was against the guys that were already on the roster or guys that were coming in and joining the team from the recruiting class. And so he was able to kind of retake his job. I think he was not the kicker to end last season. And so he regained his job and I don't think he had missed one before the kick against Louisiana. I'd have to go back and check the numbers on that. It hadn't been a problem to where you're bringing it up until he misses one, but that's always to do with kickers, right?
Yeah,
They're never the issue until you need that one to be made, and then when they miss it, it's like, oh my God, what are we doing? Hashtag college kickers and
yeah.
everything kind of gets put back under the microscope.
I think I'd have to check my records, but I think I watched him with Myers Park with maybe junior year Drake May, and then
Yeah, they
senior
would have
year
lined up.
maybe Porter Rooks and Moose Muhammad at receiver. Drake goes to UNC, Moose ends up at Texas A&M. Porter Rooks is went to NC State, now at Eastern Michigan. And that was a just absolutely loaded Myers Park team, who then I believe lost to somebody in the playoffs down the road, maybe Richmond County or Richmond Senior High. But one of the things I find fascinating about Wake is, you know, guys that they develop like a Jasheen Davis, 6'3", 270. I think what 23 and a half sacks maybe for his career, 7.5 sacks last year. He looks like he's going to be the next Wake player to make the NFL. What is it about Wake that they could take guys who were 2 or 3 stars in high school, and I don't know if Jasheen was a 4 star, maybe he was, but they typically take guys and they develop them. How far have you kind of seen them take Davis and, for instance, and just develop him into a likely NFL draft pick?
I I I'd have to look it up to be sure, but I think he was a high 3 star. I mean, he's a kid that came from Georgia, and I think Wake had to hold off Georgia to keep him. It was either Georgia or Georgia Tech they had to hold off. It was somebody with the hometown ties.
Sure.
And I mean, he if I have his it's his fifth year. So in 2020, he would have been a freshman trying to soak up anything and everything he could from Boogie Basham, who was a projected first or second rounder and wound up, I think, being picked at the end of the second round after the 2020 season. Um, and he's just kind of kept filling out, kept bulking up, and he's explosive, man. Um, they've done a great job developing those guys. Then it was Boogie, then it was Rondell Bothroyd, who went to Oklahoma, and now it's Jasheen. And I mean it's interesting. I don't know how much you want to get into the discussion of where Wake's NIL is and where their collective is, but one of the topics that comes up when you in this day and age when you don't start well is your collective needs money. You need to be able to go out and get more players in the portal, and if it's becoming the coach adage now of if you want us to be good, you have to give us more money. Well, that might be true to an extent, but also like you can tell Wake's collective isn't completely poor because Jasheen Davis would have been plucked by somebody, anybody. I mean, he's like you said, he's a specimen out there. Anybody in the country probably would have liked to have him if they could have. So
I kind of said that last week where State played Northern Illinois and they have a senior running back also from Georgia, Amarian Brown, 1,000-yard rusher a year ago. And I'm watching him and I'm like, man, outside of maybe like 20, 30 schools in the country, like I'm sure people were on his phone. I'm
yeah,
sure the DMs were filled up, but whatever it was, he stayed loyal to Northern Illinois, and he
yeah,
got rewarded with he was the one that had the 83-yard catch against Notre Dame on like, I don't know if it was a wheel route, but basically ran down the left seam. And, that was the reward of staying at Northern. But it's a fascinating thing where, coaches call it doing a Jordan Addison. It can cripple a program
Yeah.
when USC plucks Jordan Addison out of Pittsburgh. And there was extenuating circumstances there where Kenny Pickett, the quarterback, leaves, the offensive coordinator gets fired, the wide receiver coach left. So there was a lot going on there. But that's obviously a big picture discussion. For the readers, where can they find your stuff this week?
Yeah, that's Deacons Illustrated. The address is wakeforest.rivals.com. The latest thing up there, I don't know if it'll still be the latest thing by the time this gets posted, but the latest thing is a Q&A with you.
Hmm.
Diving into all things Wolfpack, and come check it out. There's a lot of fresh content on there.
And then we'll just wrap it up with this. I know you recently went to see Wake Forest basketball. How good can the Demon Deacs be in basketball this year? Will Joe Giglio be very excited about his Deacs?
I think this team could be a top four ACC team. I know that everybody loves to throw the usual suspects in there with Duke, Carolina, and Virginia, and I've learned my lessons in doubting Tony Bennett's staying power atop the league, even if I don't think his players are all that talented. But man, Wake goes 10 deep right now. They return a guy that should be in the discussion for player of the year for preseason. I don't know if Hunter Salas gets the love that RJ Davis will or that Cooper Flagg will. Obviously, those are going to be the sexier picks, but I mean, for my money, Hunter Salas is as valuable to Wake Forest as those guys are going to be to their teams. Cam Hildreth is a returning 1,000-point scorer. Efton Reed is a big 7-footer in the middle who missed the first 7 games last year. And then we got to see how much better Wake was defensively and rebounding the ball with him. Um, they've got the Juke coming in.
Hmm.
He's going to play some. I don't think he gets over like 10 to 15 minutes a game, but I think he can help them win games this year.
That'd be
Um,
Jaden Juke Harris, who's from Salisbury.
yep. It's kind of funny. Like last year, they brought in Hunter Salas as a former 5-star, former McDonald's I believe he was a McDonald's kid.
I think the game wasn't played, but he was.
Yeah. And I didn't really know what to make of him because he didn't show that much at Gonzaga. And then he comes to Wake and he's a nearly 20 point a game scorer. They've kind of got the same thing, but at a different position, bringing in Omaha Baloo from Iowa State.
Yeah.
And he barely played last year, and he's coming off of a foot injury that he needed surgery for and missed most of the summer. But I mean, he's 6'8", 225, sculpted length. They're going to throw him in there at the 4. And I mean, they'll miss certain parts of Andrew Carr's game, but they'll get a whole lot more athletic putting Omaha Baloo in there at the 4 over Andrew Carr, who transferred out to Kentucky. Um, Same thing with Trayvon Spillers, the kid they got from App State. He was a double machine in his 1 year for the Mountaineers, and
Good shot blocker.
uh, yeah, great shot blocker too. And Wake liked him so much when he had 10 and 10 against them in the first round of the NIT that they went and got him when he went into the portal.
Sneaky
Um,
handshake lines. Sneaky handshake lines.
yeah, that's going to happen more and more. Tyler Johnson might have been one of the only guys that Louisville wanted to keep through the coaching change. And look, he's probably not as talented as Boopy Miller. He's not going to come close to the scoring numbers that Boopy Miller had, but I think he's a better fit for what Wake wants out of their point guard than Boopy was. Um, Boopy is also one of those intra-conference ACC transfers who's now at SMU, but I really think they like what they're going to get out of Ty Lore. He goes by Ty, and that's going to be confusing as hell because he's a fast distributing point guard, and Wake just 2 years ago had a fast distributing point guard in Ty Appleby.
Sure.
So it's a team that right now, I mean, this could change in a couple months. They have not had good starts to seasons under Steve Forbes when you talk about non-conference losses that wind up hurting when it's resume time in February and March. But right now, it's a team that to me looks like they could be a top four team in the ACC.
Good deal, man. Good deal. Well, we've been talking to Conor O'Neill from Deacons Illustrated, part of the Rivals.com network. This is JC Zembel from the Wolfpack Central. NC State hosting Wake Forest, 12 o'clock Saturday on the CW network. Thank you all.